If you were to walk into a completely dark room right now, say your own bedroom or your office,
Right.
you wouldn't have to consciously think about how to turn on the light.
No, you just do it.
Exactly. You wouldn't freeze in the doorway, calculate the distance to the wall, or like actively search your memory for the location of the switch.
Yeah, your hand would simply reach out and find it.
It just finds it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't use your conscious decision-making brain at all. Well, neuroscience actually tells us that up to 50% of what you will do today, so what you eat, how you speak, which shoe you tie first.
How you react to a stressful email.
Yes, all of it. It's all going to be executed by this ancient piece of hardware near your brainstem that is essentially running on total autopilot.
It is a genuinely staggering reality to confront when you really think about it, because we all walk around carrying this profound illusion of control.
Oh, totally.
We believe that every single time we reach for our phone or pour a cup of coffee or skip a workout, that we are making a distinct conscious choice in that moment.
Like we're the ones driving the car.
Right. But underneath that illusion of executive control is a silent, incredibly powerful biological machine. And it is constantly recording your actions, looking for patterns, and then hardwiring those patterns into physical and neurological pathways.
So you never have to think about them again.
Exactly.
And that silent machine is exactly what brings us here today. So, welcome to our deep dive into the architecture of human behavior. To you, the listener, whether you are trying to prep for a massive life pivot, or maybe you're trying to figure out why you just can't stick to a new workflow.
Or why you end up doom scrolling.
Right, why you inevitably end up scrolling on your phone at 11 p.m. when you swore you were going to sleep early.
Yeah.
Look, this deep dive is custom tailored for you. Our mission today is to give you the blueprint.
The actual mechanics.
Exactly. We want to help you become the conscious architect of your own life by decoding exactly how these automatic patterns, these habits, actually form, how they can be systematically broken, and how they govern almost every facet of our daily existence.
And we have an exceptionally rich stack of sources to guide this exploration today.
We really do.
We are going to be synthesizing the seminal texts on behavior design. So this includes the frameworks from James Clear's Atomic Habits, the foundational journalism of the Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and the behavioral models mapped out in Tiny Habits by B.J. Fogg.
But we aren't just looking at the psychology side of things.
No, not at all. We are layering in clinical neuroscience papers that detail the literal electrical mechanisms at play in your brain. And we're also going to draw on practical clinical guides. Things regarding mindful eating and digital detoxing from institutions like Healthline and Insight Psychology.
So we can actually see how these theories hold up against our most stubborn modern vices.
Exactly.
But before we can even talk about changing our habits or hacking our routines, we have to understand the biological machinery driving them. We have to take a trip inside the physical structure of the human brain.
We have to start at the foundation.
All right, okay, let's unpack this. Because the neurological blueprint of a habit is where this entire conversation has to begin. The sources point us to a foundational concept popularized by Charles Duhigg. It's called the habit loop.
A very simple but powerful concept.
Right, he breaks it down into 3 stages. So a cue, a routine, and a reward.
Yep.
On paper, that sounds almost too simple, But the sources suggest this 3-part loop is the absolute bedrock of all automatic behavior.
It really is.
So can we look at what is physically happening inside the skull when that loop is actually triggered?
What's fascinating here is how this loop actually manifests physically in the brain.
Yeah.
As we dive into this, just notice the visual backdrop behind us.
Well, the animated neural network.
Yeah, that network that is slowly, node by node, blending into a bustling, highly automated cityscape, because that is exactly what your brain is doing every single day. It is building an automated, highly efficient city.
I love that visual.
To understand the mechanics of the habit loop, you have to look at how power and authority transition between different regions of your brain. So when you decide to do something brand new, say you decide to learn a complex new software program for work, or you attempt a totally new diet.
Something that takes effort.
Right. You are engaging the outer layer of your brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex.
Right, the prefrontal cortex, the PFC. This is the part right behind our foreheads, yeah.
That's the one.
It's often described as the CEO of the brain, like the part that handles logic and personality.
Yes, exactly. The PFC is responsible for all of your intentional, goal-directed decisions. It handles complex problem-solving, long-term planning, and critically impulse control.
So it's the responsible part of us.
It is the part of you that says, I am going to eat a salad instead of a donut because I want to be healthy in 10 years.
Which is easier said than done.
Oh, yeah, and there is a massive biological catch to using the prefrontal cortex. It is incredibly energy intensive.
Like it burns a lot of calories.
It burns an exorbitant amount of metabolic fuel, glucose and oxygen. If your brain had to rely on the prefrontal cortex for every single action you took from the moment you woke up,
Oh, wow.
I mean, if you had to consciously calculate how to tie your shoes, how much pressure to put on the gas pedal, how to form every single syllable when you speak,
You'd be exhausted.
you would be entirely paralyzed by cognitive exhaustion before you even finished breakfast.
You know, I can actually feel that sometimes. When you are learning to drive a manual transmission car for the first time or trying to navigate a foreign city where you don't speak the language,
Oh, absolutely.
it physically hurts. You feel a tangible brain fog because you were just burning through all that fuel so fast.
That feeling of mental fatigue is a very real biological limitation. And evolution recognized that limitation millions of years ago.
Because we had other things to worry about.
Right. Our ancestors needed the prefrontal cortex to calculate complex survival strategies, like tracking prey or anticipating the weather. They couldn't waste that precious energy figuring out how to put one foot in front of the other.
That makes a lot of sense.
So the brain evolved a mechanism to offload repetitive work. It shifts the control of a behavior from the outer, energy-hungry prefrontal cortex down to a deeper, older, much more primitive part of the brain called the basal ganglia.
Okay, the basal ganglia, and where exactly is that?
It's situated deep within the center of the brain, near the brainstem. And within the basal ganglia, there is a specific cluster of neurons called the striatum.
The striatum.
Yeah. The striatum is essentially the engine room of habit formation. As you repeat a behavior over and over, the prefrontal cortex begins to power down, and control literally shifts into the striatum.
It just hands over the keys.
Basically, yes. The basal ganglia stores these learned patterns and automates them, and it requires almost zero glucose, zero conscious thought, and zero effort.
Let me see if I have this visual right, because I love thinking about this like a spacecraft.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, the prefrontal cortex is the manual override. The pilot is like knuckling the steering column, actively dodging asteroids, constantly adjusting the thrusters. It is highly effective, but it's slow, and the pilot gets totally exhausted.
Right.
The basal ganglia, on the other hand, is the autopilot. Once you flip that switch, the ship flies perfectly smooth, it's incredibly efficient, and the pilot can go take a nap in the back.
That's the perfect way to look at it.
But, and I assume this is the major danger here, once that autopilot is engaged and the pilot is asleep, it becomes really, really hard to course correct if the ship is heading towards a star.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and we can actually push it a step further, because what keeps the autopilot locked onto its trajectory isn't just a switch, it's the gravitational pull of a very specific neurochemical.
Oh, let me guess. Dopamine.
Dopamine. To stick with your spacecraft analogy, dopamine is the fuel that powers the transition from manual override to that unstoppable autopilot.
We hear the word dopamine thrown around constantly in pop culture. Usually it's described purely as the pleasure chemical, like, I eat a piece of cake, my brain gives me dopamine, I feel happy.
Right, the reward.
But the neuroscience papers in our sources suggest that definition is a bit lacking, right?
It's a vast oversimplification. From a neuroscientific perspective, dopamine is less about pleasure and much more about learning, anticipation, and motivation.
Wait, motivation.
Yeah. Dopamine is produced deep in the brain in an area called the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA for short.
Okay, the VTA.
When you encounter something rewarding, the VTA pumps dopamine into the nucleus accumbens, which serves as a major hub in the brain's reward circuit. But here is the critical discovery that fundamentally changes how we understand habits.
Lay it on me.
Wolfram Schultz, a pioneering neuroscientist whose work is highlighted in our clinical sources, he discovered that the timing of dopamine release is not what we thought it was.
Wait, timing? What do you mean by timing? I always assumed the timing was super simple. You do the action, you get the reward, you get the dopamine.
That is how it works the very first time you do something unexpectedly rewarding.
Okay.
But Schultz's research on primates revealed something astonishing about learning. Once a pattern is established, like once the brain recognizes the cue, the dopamine spikes before you ever get the reward.
Before.
Yes, it spikes during the anticipation of the reward.
Wait, so if my phone is across the room and it buzzes, that's the cue. My dopamine is spiking before I even cross the room, before I even know if the message is good or bad.
Exactly. The buzz is the cue. Your brain recognizes the pattern. Buzz equals a potential social reward or novel information, so your VTA immediately floods your system with dopamine.
Wow.
And what does that feel like? It doesn't necessarily feel like joy.
No, it feels like an itch.
Yes, it feels like an urge. It feels like a narrowing of your focus until the only thing that matters in the world is crossing the room and turning over that phone. That anticipatory spike is the craving.
It's driving you.
It is your brain's biological mechanism to force you to execute the routine so you can secure the reward it now expects.
It's pulling you forward. So the dopamine isn't a high five at the finish line, it's the starter pistol firing at the beginning of the race.
It is the engine of desire. And here is where the physical architecture of the brain actually changes. Because every time this loop fires, the cue triggers the dopamine anticipation, which drives the routine, which secures the reward. Your brain undergoes a phenomenon called synaptic plasticity.
I've heard that term.
Specifically, a process known as long-term potentiation, or LTP.
Okay, yeah, I've seen the acronym LTP in the notes. We often hear the old neuroscience adage, neurons that fire together wire together.
Donald Hebb's theory.
Right, from the 1940s.
Yeah.
But what is mechanically happening during long-term potentiation? How do neurons actually wire together?
It's a literal physical construction project inside your head.
Really?
Yeah, think of a synapse. It's the microscopic gap between two neurons. When you perform a habit, an electrical signal travels down one neuron, jumps across that gap using neurotransmitters, and activates the next neuron.
Okay, I'm with you.
During long-term potentiation, repeated firing across that specific gap causes the receiving neuron to physically change.
It changes shape.
It builds more receptors on its surface, it becomes hypersensitive to that specific signal, and furthermore, the pathway gets wrapped in a fatty substance called myelin.
Myelin.
Right, which acts like insulation on an electrical wire. It allows the signal to travel faster and with way less energy loss.
So it's not a metaphor. You are literally paving a dirt road into a multi-lane, high-speed neural superhighway.
Yes. The physical structure of your brain is different today than it was yesterday, based purely on the routines you repeated.
That is wild.
And this brings us to a somewhat chilling realization about the basal ganglia. The brain is entirely agnostic about morality.
What do you mean by that?
It does not care if the habit is objectively good or bad for your long-term health. It doesn't know the difference between the cue of lacing up your running shoes and the cue of lighting a cigarette.
Oh, right.
All the basal ganglia cares about is efficiency. If you repeat a sequence, it will automate it to save glucose, period.
That is terrifying. It means we have this incredibly efficient automation machine in our heads, and it will just blindly build a superhighway toward our own destruction if we give it the wrong blueprint.
Exactly.
But I mean, on the flip side, I suppose it's also deeply empowering. Because if the brain is just a machine blindly automating repetition, the core question for the listener becomes, how do we consciously trigger the right repetitions?
Right. How do we hijack it?
Yeah. If my prefrontal cortex wants to get fit, how do I trick my basal ganglia into automating the jogging instead of the smoking?
And that perfectly transitions us from the neurobiology of the brain into the psychology of change. Because while the neuroscience gives us the how, we really need a behavioral framework for the what.
The strategy.
Right. And according to James Clear's framework in Atomic Habits, if you want to consciously design the right repetitions, you cannot start with what you do. You have to start with who you believe you are.
Okay, this was one of the most paradigm-shifting concepts in the source material for me. Because almost every time we try to change a habit, we start with a tangible goal, right?
Always.
But Clear breaks down behavior change into 3 concentric circles, like the layers of an onion.
That's a good way to picture it.
The outermost layer is outcomes. So this is what you get. The middle layer is processes, which is what you do. And the innermost core, the absolute center of the onion, is identity. This is what you believe.
And the fundamental flaw in how most people approach New Year's resolutions, or really any major behavioral shift, is that they work from the outside in.
They start at the outer layer.
They start with an outcome-based goal. A person looks in the mirror and says, I want to lose 20 pounds. Or they look at their bank account and say, I want to save $10,000.
Which, I mean, makes sense on the surface. You identify the problem, you set the target. But based on our brain discussion, I'm assuming the issue here is that an outcome-based goal relies entirely on the prefrontal cortex.
Precisely. Let's look at the lose 20 pounds example. If your internal self-image, your identity, is still, I am a person who hates exercise and loves junk food,
Right.
but your outcome goal is to lose weight, you are at war with your own default programming. Every single day, your prefrontal cortex has to fight against the massive automated weight of your basal ganglia.
The manual override versus the autopilot.
Yes, you have to forcefully tell yourself, I don't want to go to the gym, I'm not a gym person, but I am going to force myself to suffer through this so I can reach that 20-pound outcome.
And as we just established, that requires a constant, massive supply of glucose and willpower, which inevitably depletes.
It always runs out.
So by like week 3 of January, the prefrontal cortex is totally exhausted, the autopilot takes over again, and you're back on the couch eating chips.
Which is exactly why Claire argues that the only sustainable alternative is to build identity-based habits. You must work from the inside out.
Start at the core of the onion.
Instead of focusing on the outcome of losing 20 pounds, you focus entirely on shifting the core identity. You start telling yourself, I am the type of person who moves more every day.
I see.
Or instead of saying, I want to write a novel, you adopt the identity, I am a writer.
There is a fantastic anecdote in the source material about James Clear's wife that illustrates the sheer power of this internal narrative. Could you walk us through that? Because it really clarified for me how identity dictates behavior.
Oh, it's a wonderful example. So Clear shares a story about his wife when she was younger, attending a new high school. It was the first day of class, and she was in a large room full of complete strangers.
The classic intimidating high school scenario.
Right. The teacher decided to do an icebreaker and went around the room having everyone introduce themselves. After everyone had spoken, the teacher asked if anyone in the room thought they could remember everyone's name.
Oh, wow. Out of nowhere.
Yeah. And Clear's wife, almost on a whim, raised her hand. And to everyone's surprise, including her own honestly, she flawlessly named all 30-something people in the room.
I can't even remember 3 names at a dinner party, let alone 30 teenagers.
Right. And the student sitting next to her was equally stunned, remarking that he couldn't even remember her name. But here's the crucial psychological shift. That singular moment was an intensely affirming experience for her.
It clicked something in her brain.
It crystallized a new belief. From that day forward, her internal narrative shifted to, I am the type of person who is good at remembering names.
Just from that one event.
Just from that. And because she adopted that identity, she naturally began acting in alignment with it for the rest of her life. When she met someone new, she paid closer attention. She used their name in conversation. She didn't do it to reach a goal. She did it because that is simply who she believed she was.
Her identity drove a lifetime of automated behavior.
Precise.
I love that story. But I do have to play devil's advocate here for our listener. Because if our listener is, say, sitting in traffic right now, and they are objectively out of shape, haven't worked out in 3 years, and they suddenly look in the rearview mirror and say, I am an athlete, doesn't that just feel like a total delusion?
It can feel that way, yes.
It feels like the whole fake it till you make it self-help trope.
Yeah.
How do you bridge the gap between being completely untrained and genuinely believing your core identity as an athlete without feeling like a massive imposter?
It is a vital critique, and the literature is very clear on this. You cannot just magically declare a new identity and expect the brain to accept it.
Because the brain knows you're lying.
Exactly. The brain is a highly skeptical organ. It requires empirical evidence. If you tell your brain, I am a marathon runner, but your physical history proves otherwise, the brain will reject the identity as cognitive dissonance.
It'll just say, no, you're not.
Right. Clear's solution to this is the concept of casting votes. You have to prove it to yourself with small wins. Every single action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics of a vote. If my desired identity is I am the type of person who moves more every day, my first vote isn't going to a CrossFit class for an hour, right?
No, that's too big.
My first vote might be buying pedometer and walking just 50 steps from my front door and back.
Yes, that's a perfect vote.
But again, I'm going to push back here. Walking 50 steps doesn't make me an athlete. Is my brain really going to accept that tiny action as proof?
This is where we need to look at the clinical data regarding intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
When you chase an outcome, like losing 20 pounds to look good for a wedding or working purely for a monetary bonus, you are relying on extrinsic motivation.
An outside reward.
Right. Extrinsic rewards stimulate the dopamine system temporarily, but they don't fundamentally change how you view yourself.
They don't touch the identity layer.
Exactly. However, intrinsic motivation, which is acting in accordance with your core values and identity, that engages the prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum in a much more sustainable way. When you walk those 50 steps, no matter how small they seem, you aren't faking anything.
You actually did it.
You physically performed the action. You provided undeniable, objective evidence to your brain that you did the thing the identity requires.
So I am essentially building an undeniable track record. I walk 50 steps today, that's 1 vote. I walk 100 steps tomorrow, that's 2 votes. I haven't lost a single pound yet, so my outcome hasn't changed, but my internal ledger is starting to tip.
Exactly. Over time, those continuous small wins shift the brain's internal reward mechanism. The behavior itself becomes the reward because it affirms your sense of self.
You start to feel proud.
Yes. And when pride becomes attached to a behavior, it signals the basal ganglia that this is a routine worth automating.
Okay, so we've established the foundation. We know who we want to be. We have aligned our prefrontal cortex with a new identity-based goal, and we understand that we need to start casting tiny votes.
Right.
But now we need the actual blueprints. We need the mechanical tools to physically install these new routines into our basal ganglia so they stop feeling like work and start becoming automatic. How do we construct a habit from scratch?
For the mechanics of construction, we turn to B.J. Fogg's behavior model. Fogg is the founder of the Behavior Design Lab at Stanford University, and he reduces the complexity of human behavior down to a very elegant, predictable equation.
What's the equation?
He says behavior happens when motivation, ability, and prompts converge at the exact same moment. He calls it B equals MAP.
B equals M-A-P. So if any single one of those 3 variables is missing, the behavior simply does not occur.
It fails, yes.
Let's play this out with a hypothetical then. Let's say I want to build a habit of playing the guitar every evening.
Okay, good example.
If I am highly motivated, like I really want to be a musician, and I have a guitar sitting right in the middle of my living room as a prompt, but I have absolutely no idea how to read sheet music or hold a chord, the behavior fails. The ability variable is 0.
Correct. The friction is just too high. You literally can't do it.
And conversely, if I am a virtuoso guitar player, so my ability is high, and the guitar is sitting right there, so the prompt is present, but I just got fired from my job and I am completely depressed, my motivation is 0, the behavior also fails.
Yes, exactly. And what Fogg realized is that out of those 3 variables, motivation is the most unreliable.
It's fickle.
It fluctuates like the weather. It is heavily dependent on your sleep, your blood sugar, your emotional state. Therefore, if you want to design a habit that actually sticks, you shouldn't focus on hyping yourself up.
Stop watching motivational YouTube videos.
Right. You should focus entirely on making the ability requirement incredibly low and ensuring the prompt is unavoidable.
I recall the source material discussing a famous Stanford class experiment Fogg ran in 2007 that proved just how explosive this model is when applied at scale. Can you explain what his students did? Because it is mind-blowing.
Oh, it truly is a testament to the power of tiny behaviors. So in 2007, Facebook was just opening up its platform to third-party app developers.
Right, the early days of Facebook.
Fogg taught his class of students this exact behavior design methodology. He instructed them to build apps that required almost 0 motivation and were unbelievably easy to use. So extremely high ability.
Like 0 friction.
The actions were tiny, like clicking a single button to poke a friend or send a virtual hug, and they used existing social notifications as the prompt.
They weren't asking users to fill out long forms or write essays. The friction was essentially non-existent.
Exactly. By focusing relentlessly on making the behavior tiny and the prompts obvious, his students were able to engage 24 million users on Facebook in just 6 months.
24 million.
Yes. Several of those students went on to become massive figures in Silicon Valley. It proved clinically that scale, power, and massive behavioral shifts don't come from dramatic leaps. They come from meticulously designing for tiny, frictionless steps.
Which lines up seamlessly with James Clear's 4 laws of behavior change. If Fogg gives us the equation, Clear gives us the instruction manual.
Exactly.
According to Atomic Habits, if you want to build a good habit, you have to follow 4 rules. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
And Clear's Make It Easy law directly correlates to Fogg's focus on ability. Clear introduces a profoundly practical tool called the 2-minute rule. The rule states that a new habit should take less than 2 minutes to do.
I found this rule so counterintuitive at first. Because if my goal is to read 50 books a year, reading for 2 minutes seems completely useless.
It feels like you're not doing enough.
Right. But Claire says, if your goal is to read a book a week, your new habit isn't read a chapter a day. Your habit is literally read 1 page. Or if you want to run a marathon, your habit isn't jog 3 miles. Your habit is put on my running shoes and tie the laces.
The brilliance of the 2-minute rule is that it shifts your neurological focus from being in motion to taking action.
What's the difference?
When you are researching running shoes or reading reviews of books, you feel like you are doing something, but you are just in motion. The basal ganglia isn't learning anything. The 2-minute rule forces you to cross the starting line.
It gets you on the track.
Right. Once you read that one page, the friction of starting is gone. You are very likely to read a second page. But even if you don't, even if you read one page and close the book, you still cast a physical vote for your identity as a reader. You activated the neural pathway.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How do we actually trigger these tiny habits? Because motivation is a myth, and sticky notes fall off the mirror, and phone alarms just get snoozed. How do we create a bulletproof prompt? This is where both Clear and the behavioral experts at Bionic talk about a technique called habit stacking.
Oh, habit stacking is perhaps the most masterful way to manipulate your brain's existing infrastructure.
How so?
Instead of trying to build a new neural pathway from scratch, you anchor your new desired habit to a reliable existing one. You draft off the momentum of a habit your basal ganglia has already fully automated.
So you're hitching a ride.
Exactly. The formula is very precise. After or before my current automatic habit, I will do my new tiny habit.
So let's say my existing habit, the one I do every single morning without fail, even when I'm half asleep, is turning on the coffee maker. I don't need motivation to do it. The basal ganglia handles it.
You do it blindly.
Right. So I can stack my new habit right on top of it.
Yeah.
After I press the start button on the coffee maker, I will meditate for 1 minute. Or after I put my toothbrush back in the holder, I will do exactly 2 squats.
From a neurobiological perspective, this works so well because it actively combats something called decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue.
Every conscious decision you make during the day, what to wear, what to eat, how to reply to an email, it drains a tiny bit of glucose from the prefrontal cortex. If you have to actually decide when and where to do your squats, you are introducing friction.
You're burning fuel.
Yes. Habit stacking bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely. The existing routine of putting the toothbrush away acts as an automatic neurological trigger. The physical context of the bathroom sink becomes the cue. You don't have to decide. The environment dictates the action.
It's like drafting behind an 18-wheeler on the highway. You let the massive heavy momentum of the old habit pull the tiny new habit right along in its slipstream.
It's a great visual.
And you just touched on something crucial, the environment. Clear calls the physical environment the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. If we want to design a habit, we have to design the room we are sitting in.
Because the human brain is a context recognition machine. The hippocampus, which is a brain structure deeply involved in memory and spatial navigation, is constantly scanning your environment and linking physical locations to behaviors.
Like smell.
Yes, think about the olfactory bulb. If you walk past a bakery, the smell of fresh bread hits your receptors. That environmental cue travels directly to the hippocampus and the amygdala, instantly triggering the dopamine anticipation of reward.
Even if I just ate lunch.
Exactly. You weren't hungry 10 seconds ago, but the environment hijacked your neural circuitry.
So if we want to build a reading habit, we shouldn't rely on willpower. We should place the book directly on the center of our pillow when we make the bed in the morning.
Exactly.
Because when we walk into the bedroom at night, the visual cue of the book on the pillow is unavoidable. The environment prompts the behavior.
You are pre-programming your brain's cues by curating your physical space. You make the right choice, the most obvious and accessible choice in the room.
Okay, so building good habits is a game of tiny steps stacked onto existing automated routines within an environment that has been carefully curated to make the right choice the path of least resistance.
That's the building phase, yes.
But building is only half the battle. What happens when the basal ganglia has already hardwired a destructive loop? What if the superhighway is already built and it's leading straight toward a bad habit like smoking or doom scrolling or biting our nails? How do we tear up the asphalt?
Well, this is where we encounter the sheer evolutionary stubbornness of the human brain. The neurological difficulty of breaking a bad habit cannot be overstated.
It's that hard.
As we discussed earlier, the dopamine anticipation pathway is deeply ingrained. The brain expects the reward. Denying that reward doesn't just cause psychological annoyance, it leads to genuine physical withdrawal symptoms. The neural circuits in the striatum fiercely resist deletion. You cannot just go into your brain and hit a delete key on a neural pathway.
Charles Duhigg is very explicit about this in The Power of Habit. He introduces what he calls the golden rule of habit change. And it's a bit of a tough pill to swallow because he states that you can never truly extinguish a habit.
No, the neurological loop is too strong and too permanent.
Instead, you have to hijack it. You must keep the initial cue, you must keep the reward, but you have to replace the routine.
It is entirely an exercise in rerouting the neurological traffic. You use the brain's existing momentum against itself.
Duhigg illustrates this golden rule with the incredible historical story of Bill Wilson, the man who founded Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a profound look at how this neuroscience applies to the most extreme behaviors.
It really is.
Could we walk through the mechanics of Wilson's transformation? Because he didn't just stop drinking through willpower.
No, willpower is totally insufficient for severe addiction. Bill Wilson was a severe chronic alcoholic. His life was falling apart. If we map his addiction onto the habit loop, the cue was often a feeling of intense anxiety, stress, or a deep need for escape.
Okay, that's the trigger.
The routine obviously was consuming massive amounts of alcohol, and the reward was the numbing of the anxiety, a temporary sense of relief, and often a twisted form of camaraderie with the other patrons at the bar.
So the loop is anxiety triggers drinking, drinking delivers numbing and connection.
Correct. When Wilson eventually had a profound spiritual awakening and achieved sobriety, he fundamentally intuitively understood the golden rule. He knew the anxiety, the cue was never going to disappear. Life is stressful.
You can't just delete stress.
Right. And he knew his brain would always demand the reward, that relief and connection. So he didn't try to suppress the cue or deny the reward. He entirely replaced the routine. He created Alcoholics Anonymous.
This is brilliant when you look at it mechanically. When the cue of anxiety hit him, his new routine wasn't drinking. His new routine was going to a meeting. It was talking to a sponsor. It was engaging in community service.
Yes.
And the reward he received, the end of that new routine, was exactly what his brain was looking for. Relief from the anxiety, an escape from his isolation, and intense camaraderie. He achieved the same exact reward, triggered by the same exact cue, but achieved through a completely different, non-destructive routine.
He essentially installed a neurological bypass. And for our listeners dealing with less severe, everyday bad habits, we can apply James Clear's inversion of his 4 laws.
How does that work?
Well, if building a habit means making it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, then breaking a bad habit means you must make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying.
Make it invisible seems to be the ultimate secret weapon for self-control. Clear points out something fascinating. The people who appear to have the highest levels of superhuman self-control don't actually possess more willpower than the rest of us.
Not at all.
They just spend less time in tempting situations. They engineer their environment. If you want to stop eating junk food, you don't buy a bag of chips, put it on the counter, and try to out-willpower your basal ganglia. You make it invisible by never bringing it into the house in the first place. You eliminate the cue.
Because if the cue is present, the dopamine anticipation will trigger, and the fight is already lost. You must reduce exposure to the trigger, but it's important to acknowledge that for deeply stubborn, heavily myelinated habits, environmental design isn't always enough.
Right, sometimes it's deeper.
This is where clinical interventions become necessary. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a highly effective, evidence-based approach here.
How does CBT actually interact with the habit loop?
CBT helps individuals consciously identify their cognitive distortions and the invisible internal cues, like specific anxieties or self-doubt that trigger their bad routines.
It shines a light on them.
Exactly. By bringing these invisible cues into conscious awareness, CBT essentially retrains the prefrontal cortex to intervene and create a pause before the basal ganglia takes over. And in more severe cases of obsessive-compulsive behaviors or treatment-resistant addiction, modern medicine uses advanced neurological therapies that alter the physical brain.
Like what? What kind of therapies?
Transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, is one. It uses targeted magnetic pulses to activate specific underactive areas of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, to artificially boost impulse control.
Wow, magnets.
Yeah. There is also deep brain stimulation, or DBS, which is much more invasive. It involves surgically implanting microscopic electrodes directly into the brain to deliver electrical impulses that literally disrupt the malfunctioning circuits in the basal ganglia and reward pathways.
It is wild to think we have reached a point where we can literally interrupt a bad habit at the electrical level with a pacemaker for the brain.
Science is incredible.
But for the everyday, non-clinical bad habits, I always picture breaking a habit like trying to change the course of a raging river. The river itself is the dopamine, and the deep canyon it flows through is the routine. If you try to stop a bad habit using pure willpower, it's like trying to build a dam across the canyon.
And what happens to a dam?
Eventually, the water pressure builds up, the stress accumulates, and eventually the dam shatters, the water rushes through with even more force, and you have a massive relapse. You can't just block the water. You have to carve a brand new, slight deeper riverbed nearby, a new routine, so that when the water flows, it naturally diverts into a safer direction. You have to give the dopamine a new place to go.
This raises an important question, though. Because if your goal is to carve a new riverbed, you first have to know exactly where the water is coming from. How much conscious awareness is actually required to spot the cues we are blind to?
That's a great point. Many of our most powerful triggers, a subtle feeling of boredom, a specific time of day, a fleeting negative thought, they are completely invisible to us. We execute the routine before we even realize the cue happened.
Which perfectly transitions us into looking at how certain behaviors carry a disproportionate amount of weight. We've been looking at habits mostly in isolation. Drinking more water, scrolling our phones, biting our nails.
Fecal loops.
Right. But Duhigg introduces this incredible concept of the keystone habit. These are the dominoes. Changing just one specific keystone habit can inadvertently trigger a massive cascade of positive changes across a person's entire life, or, incredibly, across an entire multi-billion-dollar corporation.
The story of Paul H. O'Neill taking over as the CEO of Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, is the absolute gold standard case study for keystone habits.
Such a wild story. To set the scene, it was October 1987. Alcoa was a massive legacy manufacturing corporation, but it was struggling deeply. Quality was down, the workforce was unhappy, and profits were sliding. The board of directors brought in Paul O'Neill to turn the ship around.
And when a new CEO takes over a struggling Fortune 500 company, there is a very specific script they're supposed to follow. They hold a massive meeting with Wall Street investors, and they talk about reducing overhead, optimizing synergy, increasing profit margins, and driving shareholder value.
Exactly. So O'Neill steps up to the podium in a Manhattan ballroom filled with anxious investors. But he doesn't talk about profit margins. He doesn't mention revenue projections. In fact, his opening statement was entirely unexpected.
What did he say?
He pointed to the fire exits in the room and explained the safety procedures. And then he announced that his single, solitary priority as the new CEO of Alcoa was going to be worker safety. He wanted to make Alcoa the safest company in America, aiming for 0 injuries.
The investors literally panicked. The story goes that investors ran out of the room to call their clients from payphones, telling them to sell all their Alcoa stock immediately. They thought the board had hired a crazy person who was going to bankrupt the company by spending all their money on hard hats and safety rails.
But the investors completely misunderstood the architecture of behavior. O'Neill wasn't just being altruistic. He was a master of organizational habits. He recognized that worker safety was a keystone habit. It was the one domino that could knock down all the others.
How did he implement it?
He implemented a relentless new rule. If an employee was injured on the factory floor, the unit president had to report that injury directly to O'Neill within 24 hours. And they had to present a detailed, actionable plan to ensure that specific injury never happened again.
And if you stop and think about the mechanics of what that 24-hour deadline requires, it's brilliant. To get a report to the CEO of a global corporation in 24 hours, the unit president has to be in constant, fluid communication with their vice presidents.
Right.
The vice presidents have to be talking daily with the floor managers. And the floor managers have to be listening directly to the factory workers who are actually operating the machines. By disrupting the habits around this one single issue, safety, O'Neill forced a massive transformation in communication.
He shattered the corporate silos. In order to be safe, the machines had to be maintained better, which reduced equipment breakdowns. In order to be safe, workers had to be trained better, which increased the quality of the aluminum. In order to communicate safety issues quickly, the company had to build an early corporate intranet, connecting offices globally.
It touched everything.
By relentlessly focusing on one keystone habit, he completely dismantled and rebuilt the company's culture.
The resulting efficiency didn't just make the factory safer, it made them a well-oiled machine. By the time O'Neill retired, Alcoa's net income had grown by over 500%. His focus on that one single keystone habit ultimately raised Alcoa's market capitalization by an astounding $27 billion.
$27 billion generated by focusing on the foundation rather than the visible structure.
So for you, listening right now, the obvious and most pressing question is, how do you identify your own personal keystone habit? What is your domino? Is it getting exactly 8 hours of sleep? Is it committing to tracking your daily expenses? Is it simply making your bed every single morning? Because you hear military leaders constantly talk about making the bed as the most important task of the day. How do we find it?
The specific habit will vary wildly from person to person. For some, it's daily exercise. For others, it's a family dinner. But the mechanism of why it works is universal, and it connects directly back to James Clear's concept of identity.
Okay, bringing it back to identity.
A keystone habit is powerful because it provides constant, undeniable small wins that rapidly shift a person's core belief about themselves.
It changes the internal ledger.
Yes. Let's say your keystone habit is exercising for 20 minutes every morning. You don't just get cardiovascularly fitter. The neurological shift is much deeper. You start identifying as a healthy person.
The athlete identity we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And because you now view yourself as a healthy person, you naturally, without much conscious effort, start making better choices at lunch. You order the salad instead of the burger because that's what a healthy person does.
It just flows.
Because you exercised, you are physically tired, so you naturally go to sleep earlier. You sleep better, so you have more focus at work the next day. You don't have to consciously try to change your diet or your sleep or your focus. The keystone habit creates a fertile neurological environment for secondary good habits to take root naturally.
It's the ultimate behavioral hack. Find the one rock that changes the flow of the entire river. Let's take all of this, the neurobiology of the basal ganglia, the psychology of identity, the mechanical tools of habit stacking, and B=MAP, and let's apply it to the real world.
Let's do it.
I want to put these frameworks to the test against two of the most pervasive, stubborn, modern challenges we all face. First, let's look at our relationship with screens. Real win application 1, the digital detox.
The clinical data regarding our screen time is genuinely staggering. According to comprehensive reports from Insight Psychology, constant screen exposure, particularly to smartphones and social media, keeps the human brain in a perpetual state of heightened alertness.
We're always on edge.
It is a continuous, unending stream of stimulating information. The brain never gets to downregulate. This leads to profound mental fatigue, chronically heightened anxiety, and a phenomenon they call emotional comparison, which is largely driven by curating our lives against the highlight reels of others.
Oh, Instagram and TikTok.
Exactly. Furthermore, the specific wavelength of blue light emitted by our devices severely disrupts our melatonin production and our natural circadian sleep rhythms.
And it's so crucial to understand that this isn't an accident. We aren't just weak-willed. Technology companies employ thousands of behavioral scientists who know every single neurological mechanism we just talked about. They intentionally design their apps to hijack the dopamine loop.
It is weaponized behavior design.
Exactly. Let's map a smartphone onto Duhigg's loop. The cue is the notification ping, the vibration or the little red dot on the app icon. The routine is picking up the phone, swiping to unlock, and scrolling the feed. And the reward is social validation. But crucially, it's a variable reward.
Yes, the variability is key.
Maybe you've got a like on your photo. Maybe you got an important email. Or maybe it's just a funny video of a cat. You never know what you're going to get.
And decades ago, the psychologist B.F. Skinner proved with his famous Skinner boxes that a variable reinforcement schedule where a subject receives a reward at unpredictable intervals is the single most addictive learning pattern in psychology.
Like a slot machine.
It's the exact same psychological mechanism that makes a slot machine in a casino so addictive. Every time you pull down to refresh your feed, you are pulling the lever on a slot machine.
So knowing we are up against billions of dollars of behavior design, how do we actually detox? Insight Psychology recommends a few very practical steps for a mental health digital detox, grounded in everything we've learned.
What did they suggest?
First, create strict no-screen zones. The bedroom is the prime example. This utilizes Clear's rule of making the bad habit invisible. If the phone charges in the kitchen, the cue is entirely removed from the bedroom environment.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Second, turn off all non-essential push notifications. Just remove the red dots. Third, enforce short, hourly screen breaks to let the brain reset. And finally, when you need to do deep work, keep the phone physically out of reach in another room. make it difficult.
Increase the friction to lower the ability in Fogg's B equals MAP equation.
Exactly. And the literature shows that the benefits of this are almost immediate. Within 48 to 72 hours of starting a 7-day or 30-day detox, individuals report significantly clearer thinking, drastically deeper sleep, and the return of emotional clarity. They even stop feeling that phantom buzz in their pockets where their brain hallucinates a cue.
That phantom buzz is so common.
But I have to ask a skeptical question here. Isn't a digital detox just a temporary Band-Aid? We live in a digital world. We have to use computers for work. We have to communicate. How do we ensure we don't just relapse and shatter the dam the moment the detox ends and we log back into our email?
That is the most crucial challenge of a detox, and the answer lies in neuroplasticity and a specific brain region called the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC.
The ACC, what does that do?
The ACC is a collar-like region situated around the front of the corpus callosum. It is heavily involved in monitoring your actions, regulating your emotions, error detection, and conflict monitoring. It essentially helps your prefrontal cortex evaluate whether a behavior is a good idea.
Like a filter.
When you're constantly bombarded by digital stimuli and variable dopamine hits, the ACC becomes overwhelmed. It loses its ability to effectively monitor your actions.
It burns out.
Yes. The purpose of the digital detox period isn't to abandon technology forever and go live in the woods. It's about providing the brain the quiet space needed to weaken the old, heavily myelinated synaptic pathways. During the detox, the ACC gains back the bandwidth it needs to properly assess your behaviors without constant dopamine interference.
So the detox is essentially clearing the ground. It's quieting the noise so you can hear yourself think again.
Yes, the actual goal is to use that newly acquired quiet space to consciously architect and install new intentional routines. You know the queue is going to return. You know you will have to open your laptop for work. So you use the detox window to pre-plan the new behavior.
You set the rules.
You decide, when I open my laptop, which is the queue, I will only check email for 15 minutes, and then I will immediately close the tab, the new routine. You are using the detox to dig the new riverbed before the water comes rushing back.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
You're using the brake to transition the ship from autopilot back to manual override so you can program a better, safer trajectory before you turn the autopilot back on. Okay, let's move from the mind to the body. Real-world application 2, mindful eating. We are taking the habit framework and applying it to one of our most fundamental biological survival behaviors. Eating should be driven purely by internal hunger, but it is so often hijacked by external triggers.
The concept of mindful eating has deep roots in ancient Buddhist mindfulness practices, but in a modern clinical context, it is the practice of bringing full, non-judgmental, conscious attention to your physical cues, your cravings, and the sensory experience of consuming food.
Healthline provides an incredible overview of this, and they point out a fascinating neurological battle happening in our digestion. When we eat fast and we eat mindlessly, like scarfing down a sandwich at our desk while firing off emails or eating a bag of chips while watching a movie, we actually prevent our brain from registering fullness signals in time.
There's a lag.
There is a biological delay. It takes the stomach about 20 minutes to send the hormonal signals to the brain to say, hey, we're good down here, we have enough calories, you can stop eating.
If you eat too fast, driven by autopilot, you blow right past that 20-minute signal. This disconnect is a major driver of binge eating disorder, as well as emotional and external eating.
Let's define those. External eating is when the cue is entirely environmental, right?
Yes. External eating is when the cue is outside of you. It's the smell of a bakery walking down the street or seeing a visually engineered commercial for a pizza. You weren't physically hungry, but the environmental cue triggered the dopamine anticipation loop.
And emotional